Hi, this is Simon Upstall and welcome to another tutorial for Apple Motion, and today we're going to be taking a look at this richly textured animated gold effect. Now, the inspiration for this comes from an excellent tutorial by Brady from Texture Labs that shows you how to make this effect in Photoshop, but of course the nice thing about doing it in Motion is we get all that animation as well. So let's get going. Okay, so for this project, let's go with 1920 1080, 24 frames a second, and a duration of 5 seconds. If you are thinking of doing this at a larger size, you will need to adjust some of the values, but we're going with 1920. First thing I want to do is just bring in a couple of assets, these two here, dirt and metal. As usual, there'll be a link in the description. Let's just call this group textures, and we can close it down and hide it. And I'm going to right click to make a new group, and I'm going to grab the text tool. I'm going to type the word gold. I'm using the font called Dido regular, and let's center it up, center it over here. Let's make it nice and large like this and adjust the baseline so it's more or less centered. So this effect obviously will work a lot better with a nice large display type. If you were to try to do it with tiny little letters, it's just not going to look that good. So it really is about having lots of surface area where you can see all the nice detail. So I'm just going to call this group text, and actually I'm going to just clone it. And then we can actually just move that original text group down there and turn it off. For my clone, let's do the following. Let's first of all come over and add a border stroke. By the way, obviously, I've chosen white for my text layer, and that's important. So solid white, go for that. So for my stroke, let's go with gradient for the stroke type. And then let's look for my gold. Now, this is a custom gradient that I've made for you. There will be a link in the description, and let me just briefly explain where you need to drop it in order for it to be accessible to you in Motion. It's called My Gold Molo when you download it, and you need to move it into the following location. So if we look at the path here, it's users, your username, library, application support, Motion, and inside there you'll find the library. And inside the library, you'll find gradients, and you need to drop it into there. So that's how you install it. Okay, so let's carry on. Let's have a stroke width of 15. Let's set the position to be inside. Let's have an offset of 2. And let's come down and fade the inside and the outside by 30%. So next, let's add a stylize and indent. And what I want to do here is reduce the ambient down to 0.35. Now, none of this looks like much at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add to this group the key filter that is going to make this all look really nice. And that is filters, color, and gradient colorize. And what we're going to do is, again, from the gradient menu, select My Gold. And you can see immediately that we've got something a lot more interesting. So for this gradient colorize, I just want 2 repeats here. Again, it doesn't look like much yet, but you can see how that gradient colorize has taken the grayscale values of what's underneath and given us something that looks already a lot more like gold. The next thing I want to do is to clone this clone layer. So right click, make clone layer, and we're going to set its blend mode to add, and we're going to add filters and masks and keying and matte magic, and we're going to set the shrink to 1 and the erode to 2. So then let's duplicate this. So right click, duplicate. Let's set the blend mode of this one to color dodge, and let's set the opacity to 20%, and let's set the matte magic value here to 4 and 9 for the shrink and the erode. So the next filter is really important. It's going to be a gradient that's going to give us an overall look. So filters, generators, gradient, and let's drag that in there. And we need to give this an image mask. So right click, add image mask, and let's use the original text layer as the source. So the text group, I should say. So for our gradient, we're going to come over and look in the library for the thing called grayscale. Again, make sure I've got our overlays turned on. Let's select the adjust item tool, and I'm going to grab this and move it up like that, and this, and down like that. Maybe not all the way to the top in either case. I'm going to come back and I'm going to animate this top value here later on. So let's just leave it sort of roughly there for now. Let's open up the gradient. Let's set this left-hand tag location to 30%. Let's select the right-hand tag and set that location to 70%. And then let's come over to properties and set its opacity to 50%. What I also want to do to break the gradient up a little bit is to come to filters and distortion and underwater. And I'm going to set the size to 1 and the refraction all the way up to 200. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of speed. So I'm going to go for 0.1 with the speed, and that eventually will give us a little bit, as you see, of movement in there. We're going to add lots more movement as well, but that's just to get us going. What I should have done is come back to that stroke, actually, while I think about it, talking about gradients. And you notice that it's not really running the full height of the text. So let's drag that up and then drag this one down. And that's, as you see, looking better. Again, what I'm going to do is to animate this top here. And you can see how that gives us that nice light that runs around the edge. So the next thing I want to do is come over to the library and I want to bring in clouds. I'm going to right click and add image mask. And again, I'm going to use my original text group as the source. So over in properties, let's set the blend mode to add and the opacity down to 20%. Let's come into the generator. Let's set the horizontal scale to 16 and the speed down to 0. What I'm also going to do, because I want to rotate this, is increase the scale to 2200 for the width and 2200 for the height. And that is going to give us a layer that we can rotate and we won't see the edges. In actual fact, let's add that rotation now. Let's add parameter behavior and ramp, and let's have an end value of 20%. So that's giving us this. Already we've got some nice movement going on in there. I think what I forgot to do with the underwater, you can see we've got a little bit of a kink in there. I needed to turn on repeat edges, and you can see that's removed that. So let's move on. I'm going to close up some of these layers just to simplify things. Now let's think about our textures. So the first one I want to bring in is the metal. So I'm going to drag it above the clouds like that. Again, we want to right click, add image mask, and again we want to use that text group as the source. So let's again set up its blend mode. We are going to have color burn for this one, and we're going to set the opacity to 15%. And you can see that's giving us some really nice texture in there. And gold is always better when you've kind of got that feeling of it not being completely flat. So let's also bring in our dirt. So the dirt, bring it in above the metal. Again, right click, add image mask. Again, use that group as the source. Let's come over and again adjust its blend mode. So for this, we are going to have a multiply for the blend mode, and we're going to set the opacity to 30%. And you can see that that layer really is giving us a lot of value in terms of that texture on the gold. So as I say, we were going to do some animation of those gradients. So first of all, let's start out by coming to that stroke gradient there, and let's open up the gradient. Let's reset that X start there, and let's access it with a ramp behavior, and let's set the start value to -100 and the end to 100. And hopefully we can now see that highlight running around the bevel. Let's do that same thing with the gradient here. Let's come into the gradient generator. Again, let's open up the start here, zero out that X. Let's add in a ramp behavior, add parameter behavior ramp. Let's have a start value of -480 and an end value of +480. And now we're going to have a lot of really nice movement in there, lots of sort of highlights, which are going to look really good if we now make this move. So I'm going to right click to make a new group. and I'm going to drop everything into that new group. Incidentally, that textures group can be deleted because we've taken everything out of it. So with this new group, I'm going to come to properties and scale, and I'm just going to add a ramp to that. And I'm going to set the start value to -10%. And then we're just going to get a little bit of a zoom in like that. Now, do make sure to set your render to best, otherwise you'll get some nasty artifacts on the edges. What we can also do is add some glow, of course. So I'm going to use Hawaii Super Glow. That's all much too much, but I'm going to knock it back to 0.1%. And of course, glow really makes the whole thing come alive. And what we should really do to be responsible is to drop in a color solid behind everything and make it almost entirely black. I like a little bit of blue in there, kind of it offsets the gold a little bit. So end result is we've got something that looks like this, really nice and richly textured. Now, needless to say that all of these values that I've given you here for the opacity and so on, for these different layers, they're all going to make a huge difference. You see there, I'm playing with that opacity layer on that color dodge layer. It's making a lot of difference to the look. Let's look at this one, which is the add. You can see that's doing a lot of work as well. The gradient, again, the exact opacity level you choose is going to make a big difference. So, if you don't like the look that I've given you here, there's loads you can do with playing around with those values. Anyway, I hope that's been fun. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.